Hi everyone, I'm going to talk to you today about why, as an educator, I hate the trends that are happening on YouTube, especially with the algorithm. So maybe I'll outline the main thing I want to talk about, and then we'll kind of branch off that. So the main thing is, so YouTube gives you what you want, right? Or what you think, what it thinks you want. Okay, but the problem is, it doesn't care about what's good for you. Okay, so it's kind of like if you just keep giving children candy and whatever exactly what they want, just listen to them every time, um you're gonna have a very, very large problem on your hands. Okay, so at the very basic level, even if you're not caring about education so much, even just personal growth, okay, is kind of, I don't think, is something that's necessarily promoted. And this is similar on like things like Netflix and things where it kind of, the data and the software tries to guess what you like as a user. So it collects data about you, what you like, what you click on, and it builds like essentially a profile of who you are, and then it recommends things based on that. And so one of the problems you can kind of see in a lot of cases is that you tend to get the same stuff in your feed, even if you're kind of sick of it. It doesn't really give you room for growth. So it doesn't take into account that you could be you could be improving or growing as an individual. So I think it's sophisticated enough to take into account change. So if your viewing pattern changes, it'll change with you in some sense. But for your viewing pattern to change, you got to be exposed to new stimulus in the first place. Okay, so this is where I guess you can enter in the search and be a bit more proactive. But 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 um but in general, I've noticed that the videos that you get fed play very much to the things that what you want as opposed to what you need. And those usually it appeals to what's easy. Okay, so it's easy to kind of waste time on YouTube Shorts when it doesn't help you at all. Okay, and recently I've been watching a lot of these creator videos about sort of how to create videos on YouTube that um get mass appeal. And I think a lot of the advice is good if you're talking about entertainment. Okay, so so if you're doing entertainment, so the whole algorithm is based on, like how many clicks you get and how many hours or how long the person that clicks watches for. Okay. So you gotta lure them in with something interesting, and then you gotta keep their engagement, their attention, for long enough for the ads to run. And and that gives a lot of people an incentive to sort of entertain you when a lot of the time um they sort of promised to be educating you, and that's not very good. So there's been a lot of videos where you kind of you're hooked into watching it, so you definitely you're engaged, but after you watch it, you don't really feel very satisfied. Like, I mean, it's not really like a dislike or a like. Like, it passes the time or whatever, but like, I mean, it's like, so it's like, for example, like you click on one of the Mr. Beast videos. It's not like, some of them are really good, okay, but some of them are like they're very wasteful. It's kind of very pointless. It's very meaningless. And you get to the end and you just like kind of wish you kind of got your time back, right? But all the time the video was trying to kind of it jumps from one like really interesting thing to the next, and it's really intense. But at the end, when you find out what's going on, it's kind of like you kind of just fell victim to your attention being scammed. And and I think that's the problem with this culture. And even if the algorithm isn't doing that, the culture surrounding creating videos on YouTube is definitely doing that. Um, So you want to hook an audience, you keep it interesting, and you want them to watch it to the end. Of course, like you need people to watch things to the end for that thing to have any value at all, um, educationally. But the point I'm trying to make is that someone shouldn't feel entitled to have themselves be engaged, you know? Like it's not like you just show up to the platform and education just happens. And if it doesn't happen, then like that's like the channel's fault. And then you move on and then you get another channel. Like in some sense you're in charge and you're responsible for your own education, you know? So like even if something is not particularly like intense or high energy or whatever that usually gets you hooked when it comes to entertainment, like you got to have the maturity to make a decision about your education and try to learn something. I mean, like personally, when I learn something, I don't like high energy videos. You know, I don't like people screaming at me. I don't like people constantly trying to grab my attention. I sort of like the calmness of my own thoughts. I like to consider things. So for example, we have lots of videos where there's just like a long pause, right? And when there's a long pause, people are just like, "Oh, this is boring. What's going on?" So we just leave. Okay. But the thing is, the long pause serves a lot of different purposes, and it's not just being lazy to not cut it off, even though obviously it's much easier to not cut it out. So for one, the long pause gives you time to think. Okay, so sometimes the concepts are given at such a pace that it might be good to collect your thoughts. Of course, you could pause the video yourself, which also comes along with being able to skip the video yourself. Okay, which is not done nearly enough. Okay, people just watch it way too passively. And also, the pause also gives you an idea of how long it kind of takes to come up with the idea that starts after the pause. Okay, so it's actually kind of interesting if you think about it, because a lot of the time you're like, well, how do people come up with that? Well, the pause actually answers the question of how long it takes for someone to come up with that. Okay, because the pause is really giving people time to come up with those things. And so if you kind of really buckle down on education, okay, the kind of videos and things you get are very different to the kind of videos most creators try to make to grow their channel, which I think is fine for entertainment, but also I mean it's there's also different classes of entertainment, right? There's like the superficial entertainment, and there's the fulfilling entertainment, and in some sense, the fulfilling entertainment really is just education. Okay, and I think people really miss the point when it comes to that. And so there'll be out of the 5 million people, maybe there's only really 500 people worth educating because they're the only ones who'll take charge of their own education, and the others are just there to sort of witness a spectacle. And it's only that sometimes a spectacle when you're uneducated, right? Because lots of things um, are actually related, and that's one of the things that you learn when you're educated is a lot of things are actually related, so they're not as random as you think. And so some kind of claim of spectacle that's meant to amaze and surprise you is actually not that interesting at all, right? And so yeah, I guess to cut a long story short, I guess um so there's definitely a lot of people on YouTube who've sold out to this algorithm and this mass appeal to grow their channel. But at the end of the day, like, does their success reflect on the improvement of their viewers in their subject? You know, like so over time, a lot of people may be like watching your videos, but have they actually learned something? Like if they take a test on that subject, would they actually do well? Or like, which is kind of funny also because there's people just coming on to cram for a test, so maybe they do well in the short term, but But do those people end up being educated, or do they just scrape through a test, or maybe they don't even pass the test? They just think they learned the stuff, and I think that is one of the problems with leaving. Well, you're not really leaving the person in charge of their own education, but you're kind of you're feeding them. You're essentially tempting them to the lowest impulses. And if they're not super developed and aware of sort of what it takes to be educated, and most students are not, then that's going to really be a problem for them. And when they come to terms with it, it might be also a bit too late to even realize what's happening. Okay, so I think it's very important to be aware of these things, and yeah, and I certainly don't like being hooked. My attention being grabbed all the time. I definitely don't think these are good things. I think these might be necessary things um for the video to be watched, but the value of the video is still the first and foremost when it comes to education. Okay. And so for a long time, I guess I primarily just put my videos on YouTube just to share with certain students privately. Never really uploaded videos publicly, even though um recently there's been a lot my videos have like overtaken my subscriber count even, and so naturally it's growing a little bit, but certainly need to be wary of what this growth means, and sort of the bottom line, which is still education. Um, yeah, so I mean, so maybe I also want to talk about maybe the differences between sort of video on YouTube education and like interactive sort of in-person classes education. So one advantage of being in class, and this is why most um, sort of real-time education happens, and you can't do all these inverted classroom kind of things, at least not every all the time. Um, is you need to hold the teacher accountable. Okay, so you can't just let them preach to you like everything's true. You gotta question um the like the things which may not seem to be very sound, right? They need to sort of in some sense defend their claims. And you might think that's weird because surely they're just teaching from a textbook, everything's true, but those things didn't just come to be true from the sky. That these things were at some point debated, and then at the end there were reasons given for those things to be true, and you have to really work through it. So already if you're kind of just trusting the person like in a video, or like you're gonna have a lot of problems. Okay. Okay, another thing I guess is the in person, it's supposed to be up to date. Okay, so we're coming up with like new proofs of things. Like there's certain maths theorems, that did not have proofs accessible to high school schoolers until we've presented them. So that's another thing that's an advantage to being there in person. It's current. Okay, it's meant to reflect today and maybe even the future, whereas the video obviously can never change. But some advantages of watching a video is that it's that it is all predetermined, and you can actually skip around. Okay, so if you skip around, and so I remember this particularly when I'm watching like basketball videos. Like if you're watching the NBA live, there's so many breaks and stuff that actually um like may or may not agree with you. And in the recording, you can just skip through them all, right? So it probably saves you a lot of time as well. And you can basically do it along your own schedule. So again, this is like one where like you're basically your own teacher in some sense in terms of the scheduling, and it comes with a lot of responsibility. Um, yeah. So I guess you just need to be aware of this kind of thing and not to be stuck in this endless loop that YouTube and other these softwares like these softwares the algorithms are not I don't think they're complicated like I think it's the platform is too big for the algorithm to be that complicated. Okay, like obviously um it's a little bit more than just clicks and watch hours, but those are the main things. But the viewer satisfaction, like the likes and dislikes, may not be quite enough because those are quite maybe those can be considered pretty extreme. And most people who watch maths videos, I don't think, at least in my when I was doing maths, I never even bought like I wasn't even aware of those other buttons. I was just focused on learning the content. And now it's kind of like a little bit different now that I'm on the other end. Um, yeah, so maybe you can tell me what you think. If there's some topics that interest you, I can talk about them a bit more. Um, but so at the moment, I'm very interested in using YouTube as an education tool, but I certainly don't want to succumb to the temptations of making everything just entertainment. Though I do understand, like you can't be like like you can't be that deep with strangers, so then you have to kind of you have to make it a transition between sort of showing them something and then showing them everything, right? So obviously, like if you're just the first thing you show them is everything, then maybe they're not going to be interested and maybe even going to be a bit um confused. And yeah, and I guess that's another reason why like this kind of culture is not good because if you have a culture where everyone's doing these kind of meaningless um attention grabbing videos, then it is going to seem very strange when you see something that's purely there trying to educate you, and maybe you'll naturally distrust it um and ignore it when that's like the only thing that's actually trying to make you better.